Over a year ago, I made 2 videos about 2 SSTOs to anywhere, which carried large cargo. This is the pinnacle of all those tests. Obviously, it took me a long time, but eventually I got to this point. It's got 800 parts, and it is very big. It can carry twice the amount of the craft shown in the second video. The aim of the mission is to go to Duna and deploy its cargo, forming a fully functioning space station. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have a lot of complications with this operation. First of all, the craft is very laggy. And with opening KSP and having it open with this craft for so long comes an increase in lag. This plan involved both landing on Ike and on Duna and returning back to Kerbin. However, at the point that I had gotten to a stable orbit around Duna and had both of the modules attached to each other that are included in the cargo here, the game was so laggy, and I had already spent 11 hours working on this project, that I simply said that that was good enough. What I demonstrated in this test is that this craft can in fact do all the things that my previous crafts can, which is essentially enabling it to go anywhere that it wants. As you can see, it's not as nimble as the old crafts. In fact, it needs a specific and long duration ascent profile in order to get above the atmosphere. In order to reach sufficient speeds in its ascent profile, it not only has to ascend, but at a certain point, it needs to descend. Not that much, but just enough to get up to speed to enable it to reach sufficient velocity for orbit. And here you can see me attempting to make that orbit right now. Eventually this orbit will be made at a steady 71,000 on either side, and later it will be extended in order to reach the objects to which I will refuel on. Now you're probably wondering why I'm showing me crash on the moon here, and it's because I need to explain this 3-hour diversion and distraction that occurred to me while I was attempting to make this mission. And that is me trying to get an encounter on Minmus. That simply did not work. Now, I could have easily landed on Minmus, and I could have easily got an encounter with Minmus. But the problem was, quite simply, that every time I was waiting to get an encounter with Minmus, the Mun would come around and mess the whole thing up, meaning that I would have to expend more fuel. Eventually I just gave up and attempted to land on the Mun, but I didn't have enough fuel to slow down. But the fact that I almost did allowed me to understand that it was still feasible for this craft to land and refuel on the Mun and not on Minmus, something that I did not assume previously. And so on this second attempt that I'm making here, I will attempt to instead simply encounter the Mun and land on it. As you can see here, I've switched to the 4 nuclear engines only, and that is for the main reason of conserving fuel. Now, I don't know exactly how much it conserves, but I do know that it does conserve some. Anyways, what this leads to is me having to burn only for a short period of time around the periapsis every single time, and multiple times, lots and lots of times, in order to get that periapsis up to making an encounter with the Mun. And so I'm just going to skip that, but just know that's what I'm doing here. Finally, I was able to yeet myself up to an area where I would get an encounter with the Mun. And if you look at that, it's a very nice looking encounter. I adjust it, I move it around a bit, and after all of that, I am satisfied with the encounter. Now, when I'm coming into this encounter with the Mun, I know that I need to conserve all of the fuel that I can. And so I'm not going to be doing a straight up burn and land. I'm going to instead attempt to use my nuclear engines as much as I can before I have to use them in a landing procedure. So obviously that requires me to do a node and create an orbit and continuously bring that orbit down over time. Now, I could actually be a complete idiot here. I could actually have not understood that at all, but I don't exactly think that that's the case. And by I could have not understood something, what I'm referring to is the fact that I think that this maneuver of burning with the nuclear engines every time that I reach periapsis reduces the amount of fuel I would use overall. But I could actually be wrong about that. It could be expending way more fuel than simply going down and burning. Anyways, eventually I get the orbit whittled down to something I feel comfortable with, and I attempt the landing process. Now this is made extremely difficult by the fact that there are no actual needed landing gear on this craft, and I'm needing to land basically on that little booty that you see right there. That is all delicate and all that stuff. It's got all of those wing parts, and even more than that, it's got the ailerons and stuff like that. But eventually I do get it done, and I get myself down, and I get to the refueling process. Now, I did fail at this takeoff at some points, and it's worth mentioning that because it is a little bit of a difficult thing to do with such a large craft. It's very unwieldy, and it does not want to get up. But I did find an area that has a nice incline, and I was able to lift up off of that incline. And that's what you see me doing right here, burning with all engines, at least engines that are available in no atmosphere, and getting myself able to point upwards, all up until the point where I believe it sufficed to where I will not hit that large mountain right there. And eventually, I consider it good. And now we're going to make our exit, our great escape, so to speak, of Kerbin's sphere of influence. And this requires me to get a little orbit around the Mun, and then extend that orbit with the nuclear engines. Only 4 of those little puppies, but they do the job eventually. I will also skip this entire process, as it's much like the process of extending my orbit around Kerbin itself, for your viewing pleasure. Here I am in orbit around Kerbal now, the star, and I'm going to attempt to create an orbit that has the potentiality of encountering Duna, which is what I want. Eventually I'm going to have to spend a lot of time waiting for me to actually get a decent encounter, and I'll skip over that as well. But just so you know, this is a necessary process in the encounter. It is extending the orbit out. So after extending the orbit fully out, I then begin the arduous process of waiting for a valid encounter that I can then act on. It's not that long, but it is about an hour or so, and just for your viewing pleasure, I will skip that. Anyways, here I am attempting to set up a maneuver node in order to get a good encounter with Duna. Now what I want to do is I want to get a nice, good, clean, and deep air brake. That's what I want to do. Last time I tried this, I didn't go deep enough, if you know what I mean. Now eventually I do get this correct, and I do get it to a place that I want it to be. And eventually the next step is to do the burn, as always, and make sure that I do it right. Now this burn is very particularly long. Not as long as some other ones that I did skip over, but it is pretty long and decently long. But it was all worth it once again. I do have to remind everyone though that while I was doing this, the computer was increasingly laggy. And although I could simply stop recording and restart my computer and reload everything again, I didn't want to do that because I wanted to get it all in one take. You know how I am, I'm just like that. I like things being complete and in a nice package. But, you know, you can't always get what you want, and I did eventually end up having to do that at a certain point. But it didn't exactly solve the lagging problem because the craft has 800 parts. I mean, it's fairly difficult to solve the problem with a craft of that size. And it increased once I deployed the payload, which made it even worse, to the point where the computer was just freezing and stalling for whole minutes at a time. It was very bad. So I hope you understand at this point. I hope you understand why I did not return the craft to Ike or land on Duna or any of those things that I could have done, or return to Kerbin itself or something other than that. What I did, which was just leaving it how it was. I hope you understand that. It was something I could totally do, but I just didn't do it. But anyways, here I am going in on the encounter. What I'm going to attempt to do here is do basically a standard air braking maneuver. But the problem is that I'm not going to get enough on my first go. Even this deep into the atmosphere is not going to be enough to get myself an actual orbit without an eject from the Duna system. And so I'm going to attempt to move my aircraft in a way that it blocks more air, creating more drag later on in the descent. And that will get me close, but it still won't be enough. I will need to burn a little bit in order to make orbit, but it's all worth it in the end. Eventually I'll do some subsequent re-entries and stuff like that, and it will be a success. And here you can see me doing the re-entry fully and doing subsequent re-entries as well as the burn itself. Now, I'm speeding through this at a higher rate than all of the other footage that I have here, just because it's a little bit tedious. But I still want you to see the process that I underwent in order to do this. I did tumble around a bit in the atmosphere from time to time, but that's totally okay. Eventually, I got the orbit that I wanted, and that was that. Now, like I said, the payload of this craft is 2 times that of the one that I showcased in my second video of SSTOs, right? That craft could carry a certain payload. This thing can carry twice that. When I say it can carry twice that, I literally mean it can carry that exact payload and another version of that exact payload. Yeah, it's that good. What that essentially means is that the 2 pieces can connect together to create a basically fully formed space station. I mean, it could be more impressive, but it's far more impressive than the other payloads of my other cargo-carrying SSTOs to anywhere. And I'm going to skip to their deployment here, just to show how difficult it was at this point with the amount of lag that I was having to actually get these crafts to function. Now, both of these sections, and this is a very finicky thing, both of these sections should have remote control. I don't know why they didn't. Maybe they were out of electricity. However, that was not what was shown by the statistics and the graphs and all this stuff. I had to use this one Kerbal going EVA and going over into the craft in order to move them at all, which was a big hassle, but eventually I did do it. As you can see here, I've got both of them out, and now I'm going to go for the docking maneuver, which is really quite something. Here you can see the final docking maneuver. I'm quite impressed, although maybe I shouldn't be, considering how hard it was for me to just simply get this craft over there. And there we go. We're lining up, and we have docked. Now, the only thing left to do is to make small adjustments, and I'll skip over that just so you can see the final product. And that is it. That is how it looks, and that is how it will look in orbit around Duna at a very low altitude. Anything can come along and dock to it, refuel, fuel up the station, resupply with crew and other supplies, all that good stuff. And unfortunately, this is where I left the mission off. I considered it a success, but the lag was getting so immense, and I just had to throw the towel in. 11-12 hours is enough for me, if I'm being frank, and it should be enough for anyone. With what I did here, by demonstrating the refueling capabilities, as well as the capacity to travel interplanetarily and retain a large amount of fuel, as you could see, I definitely call it a success. Anyways, I've been Lord Pasta, I hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.